Well, this morning, I'm going to read to you from the Gospel of Luke in the 24th chapter. And this is a continuation of the Easter story. And what is happening before this is the two followers had walked to Emmaus. Jesus appeared to them. They came back to tell the disciples that they had seen the risen Lord. And so we take up from there. While they were talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to the disciples, "Peace be with you." Now they were startled and terrified and thought they were seeing a ghost. Jesus said to them, "Why are you frightened? And why do you have doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch me and see. For a ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. While in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering, Jesus said to them, "Have you anything to eat?" And they gave Jesus a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. Then Jesus said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then Jesus opened their minds to understand the Scriptures, and he said to them, "Thus it is written, that the Messiah is to suffer, to rise from the dead on the third day, and that repentance and forgiveness of sins is to be proclaimed in his name to all the nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses to all this." This is the gospel of the Lord. Well, grace and peace be to you from our risen Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, the one who calls us to be witnesses. Well, Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
There was a young girl who had a real serious question. She'd been pondering this for a little bit. And so she decided to go to her mother and asked, "Mom, how did the human race begin?" Mother responded, "Well, dear, God created Adam and Eve, and then they had children, and then their children had children, and so on." Well, the girl seemed to be satisfied with that answer and went about her way. But about 2 weeks later, she went to Dad and asked the same question. "Dad, how did the human race come about?" Well, Dad sat down and said with her, "Well, it all started with monkeys, and then it evolved to human beings." And the girl had this real puzzled look and now really confused, for she wasn't sure, is Mom telling the truth or Dad telling the truth? And so she went back to Mom and said, "Mom, I'm really confused. I don't understand. You said one thing and Dad says another thing. You said that God created the human race, and Dad said it came from monkeys." Well, the mother said, "Well, dear, I was telling you about my side of the family, and Dad was talking about his." Well, isn't that, the problem we face sometimes, trying to decide who tells the truth? Who is sharing what is true about everything? And we can think about throughout all of life, there have been many debates in kind of questions that are raised. Like way back, is the earth really flat? Will we fall off if we walk to the edge? Well, we all know that's not true, but there was many people back in those early years that believed that, yes, you could fall off the end of the earth because everything is going to have an ending. Until we can see it or hear it. And many, as we have seen, the photographs from the astronauts that have been in space showing that, well, it is a sphere and that it isn't flat. We know that. There's, in this week I was doing some reading and it came across that they were talking about how, the earth and how enormous this universe is and all the different things. And some of the things that I was reading on it was just like, it's hard for me to, fathom, wrap my mind around it. One thing this person was saying that our earth rotates at 1,100 miles an hour on its axis. I just find that hard to believe. It doesn't seem like we're moving that fast. And all I can think of is, being on a merry-go-round. You've been on one. You start spinning so fast, you almost feel like you want to fly off. And that's not going 1,100 miles an hour. Why aren't we just flying off? But we don't. And then this article was saying something about this, that the earth rotating around the sun, you talk about fast, it's going like at 480,000 miles an hour. Oh, I'm surprised we're all still standing. Is it true? Are we really going that quick? Well, and then this is one that just blew my mind. They were talking about how the Voyager was sent out into space. They're trying to find how big is the universe, and they've gotten some signals back, and it's been like 9 million miles or something, whatever. It's been long ways away, and it's taken like 13 hours to receive the signal back, at the speed of light. And the scientists are estimating that the universe is so enormous, so big, that if you were to send a signal from Earth all the way to the edge, I don't know, would there be an edge? But all the way to the end, do you know how long they're predicting that it would take to get that signal at the speed of light to get there? 15 billion years. Oh, you talk about a big universe. It is. And then you now wrap your mind on this, and God created all things. Whoa. God created this vast, enormous universe, and everything's kind of going in the right directions, and good thing we're not smashing into everything. Isn't God enormous and great? And we believe in God. Well, some do. We do. We know that. It's hard to wrap your mind on certain things, and we hear, again, at the Easter time, the disciples, we now are listening to Luke's version. This year we were reading in Mark, but this week we read in Luke's. And we know that what happened in Luke's version of the resurrection is that the women who had gone to the tomb, when they came back after seeing the messenger, and the messenger had indicated to them that, Christ is risen. And they came and told the disciples, and the disciples who heard these women share this great news, according to Luke's version, they thought the women were telling idle tales. In other words, gossiping, rumors. Actually the word in Greek that Luke used, that the women were delirious, out of their mind. Well, think about it. People rising from the dead. Once you're dead, you're supposed to be dead. Isn't that what we always thought, except us who know that's not true. But most people have thought, once you die, you're dead, and especially back then. Well, now we hear a little bit of the story. You know, the two followers going to Emmaus, and then this stranger comes in and opens up their minds, has a meal with them, and they realize it's Jesus. And so they run back to tell the disciples that they had seen the risen Lord. And then when they get back, those disciples, you know, it doesn't sound like they were convinced, because even when Jesus came, as these two were explaining what they had seen, filled with some sense of joy when seeing Jesus, did you catch it? They are still disbelieving it. They still couldn't believe it, that Jesus is alive. I mean, Jesus even said, you know, hey, you want to see the hands? Here they are. You want to see, you know, those nail marks? Right there. And then, did you catch that one thing? I mean, I would have never thought that. Hey, got anything to eat? You know, got anything to eat? Well, what he was trying to show, what? Ghosts don't eat. People do. You know? And so he ate. And so he ate. And so they got to see the risen Lord. And then Jesus goes on to tell them this, and this is where I want us to focus in on the last little bit now. He goes on and says to them, you are the witnesses of all this. All this that I have shared with you, all that you have seen, all that I have told. You are the witnesses. So what does a witness do? Any of you been called to court to be a witness? I didn't want to say anyone called to court because that'd be bad. You know, my daughter has been called to court many a times to be a witness in her vocation of being a forensic interviewer where she interviews children of abuse. She is called to verify whether these are stories that the children are saying are true. You know, they're not made up. And so she has been a witness in court. And what she says, she acts as the expert in the field then. And so she is believed because she has observed, listened, and verifies according to her training that this incident was valid and true. Well, that's one kind of witness, a witness in court. You know, when Jesus says you're going to be a witness, one of the things that he was saying to these disciples is that you who have been at this time, you have seen me who have been crucified. You probably from the distance saw me on that cross. You who right now are here can see that I am alive. And you are to go and share that. That's what he's saying as a witness. And that's what we could see. Witnesses tell what you have seen and say, I can verify this is true. But there's other witnesses, other ways of being a witness, and we can look at that like you and I. We can be witnesses because what we have heard from others who have seen, and we believe it, and then we share it. Okay? A perfect example is Paul. Paul was not an eyewitness to the crucifixion of Christ. But Paul went out and witnessed and proclaimed the good news of the risen Lord and proclaimed the goodness of Christ and the enormous love that God has and grace to all people. Paul was truly a witness, and many others were a witness to what they had heard from others, and that faith had been shared down and passed on. You know, your mom and dad, your grandma and grandpa, whatever it might have been, was your witness, the one who shared their faith with you, and also all the pastors who have served in this church served as witnesses. But here's where I'm coming at today. The word Luke uses as witness isn't one of those two. He uses the word in Greek that means martyr. Martyr. You are to be the martyrs of all these things. Do you know what martyr means? Yeah, we know what martyr means. It doesn't sound good. I'd rather be a witness than a martyr. And in a martyr, what most of us would come to this understanding of a martyr is somebody who is willing to go to the death, their death, because they're willing to stake their life on what is true. Now, I got a question. How many of things that you believe in that is true are you willing to die for? It's a tough question, isn't it? I would think that there's a lot of things that you might be willing to die for, and I think we would be willing to die for certain things. But would you be willing to die for the sake to say that you honestly, truly believe Christ is risen? Are you ready to go to your grave on that? You know, that's a tough question. You know, it's easy for us to say it in the comfort of this church. You know, but it would be very difficult for us to say it like those, like I mentioned last week, those students in Africa who were confronted with somebody who had a rifle pointed right at them and say, do you really believe it? Are you ready to die? I know some people said, I'd probably say no because I know I'd believe it, but I don't want to die, so I'm going to just tell them. That's not what a martyr does. This is what a martyr does. And I don't think Jesus was really saying this, that you have to die. You know, that this is what you have to die. I think what Jesus is really saying this is that you have to have that conviction, that sense that you're willing to die to yourself, okay? The willingness to give up and sacrifice and to live as one who truly believes that Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
And what does that mean? That you're willing to really be convicted to that sense of believing that Christ is risen and that there is hope and that there is new life, is to live each day with the conviction that because Christ is alive, that Christ gives me new life, that I am willing to live and to forgive as Christ forgave me, that I'm willing to reach out in compassion and to sacrifice and to share with those the abundance of my blessings. And I'm willing, because Christ gave his all, I'm willing to give what I have so that others might be able to have. That I'm not going to just give out of the leftovers of what God has given to me, but I'm willing to give first fruits right away. You know, I can get into stewardship now. I feel like it, but I'm not going there. But it is. You know, when I talk about tithing, isn't it? I hear more people giving me excuses why you can't tithe. Why? Well, who's going to take care of me? We got an enormous God that can make a universe and can do everything. Who do you think's going to take care of us? That's what your conviction is. God will care for me and will take care of me. And then we have a God who sits there and loves us in spite of our errors, in spite of not doing what God desires. What grace we receive from an enormous God. And how do we live that out then? How do we look at all people? Do we look at all people with eyes that Christ looks at you and me, with love that says, even though you might not be what I want you to be, or even though you are different, or even though whatever it might be, I am not here to judge you, but to welcome you, to accept you, and to love you forever and ever and ever. That's conviction. See, we in Saint John need to have that conviction that that door is never closed to anyone, that everyone is welcomed here, that everyone is accepted. That's conviction. That's conviction. To forgive somebody who hurts you. I can't believe, you hear this in the story, and a lot of people find it hard to believe that people can forgive, such as I've heard this week. There was 2 children killed in Oklahoma, bombing 20 years ago. Grandmother and mother have come to forgive. That would be hard. But they knew they had to. They knew they had to because they knew that it would affect their life if they didn't. It didn't make a difference to Timothy McVeigh, really, if they forgave him. But it made a difference in their life. And it makes a difference in others. Conviction, martyr, are you ready to die of oneself? Not to be self-centered, but to be Christ-centered. For if you truly believe Christ is risen, you are ready to live as martyrs, witnesses for the risen Lord.